Thank you, Claudia and Marcello. And indeed, with everyone in this room, our impact should amount to nothing less than in billions. So let me get intimate with you. I'm going to share with you the day of my death. According to online sources and the way I eat, drink, sleep, and if we put the cure of aging aside and artificial intelligence aside and life experience aside, I should die on May 11th, 2077. And this is not to be dramatic. In the contrary, this is something I take quite positively. It just reminds me how important my day-to-day is and how I should define and decide how I should live my life, how I should enjoy my life, and how I count on making an impact on this planet or another. You see, the Seedstars Summit is about magnifying the journeys and missions of those that want to scale, that want to build, that want to disrupt. It's about magnifying the day-to-day of what may seem small number of people and small number of companies, but what I am sure will have an impact in the near future, in my lifetime. It's also one day to shed light on societies and economies that, even though are not so far in distance, are still too far and distorted in still too many minds. It's about proving that when you put great people with great brains to do great things, then suddenly the language is universal and the mission is one. It's about demonstrating that we can have an impact in emerging markets through technology and entrepreneurship. Now let's take a step back and just remember where we stand in terms of emerging markets. They represent, by 2050, over 85% of the world population. But unfortunately, there's still quite a major gap between the developed and the developing world. And this gap is sometimes 30 to 40 times difference between two economies. And so you see, today, most of the world is gray for the greatest part of the population. But here in this room, there are so many like myself that have decided to take their day-to-day seriously and have an impact in their lifetime and make sure we change the color on this map. And there are entrepreneurs spreading everywhere, more and more. As Claudia mentioned, we're talking about over 400 million entrepreneurs. But at Seedstars, we try to focus on the 6%. Over the past years, we've used the 6% symbolically because it relates to a study that proved in the UK that only 6% of UK companies accounted for over 50% of GDP growth and job creation. These 6% are also known as startups, as high-growth companies, those with an exponential growth and job creation. And this is what we're trying to identify and support to make sure that we can have an impact as soon as possible. But the reality is that startups fail a lot. Globally, on average, 90% of these companies fail. And it's for different reasons. It can be because they didn't find the right market fit. They don't have the right access to funding. And more importantly, they probably don't have the right team. But that's okay. That's part of the entrepreneurial journey. And any investor or entrepreneur in this room knows that failure is actually part of the ingredient for the recipe of success. Now, our objective is, in the contrary, to better spot those 6% and support them so that we can make sure that they have an impact in the near future. And that's why it's so important to build an ecosystem. So, simplistically, an ecosystem needs to grow on 3 pillars: culture, environment, opportunity. And that fosters success, which then that breeds success. And we have suddenly a virtuous cycle going. So in terms of culture, we talk about the mindset and the acceptance of failure. When we talk about the right environment, it's the institutions, the infrastructures that need to foster the ecosystem. And this is where governments have such a strong role. And finally, the opportunity, which includes access to funding, having the right talent on the ground, and even the market in itself. And over the 65 countries that we've came across and that we have discovered, we've analyzed these different ecosystems. And yet again, the gap is still huge, especially when your reference point is Silicon Valley. But that's okay, we'll get there. And I'm wondering if we should stop maybe looking at how the developed world built their entrepreneurial ecosystems, because we're not at the same starting point. And we're not at the same foundation and cultural heritage than in the developed world. And this is where, for example, if you look at e-commerce and how e-commerce has been built, it's not like in Europe where you can just have a Shopify plugin, PayPal, and then use the post office or DHL to send over your goods. It's not the same thing. Here is an example of Jumia, which is the biggest e-commerce in Africa. And when I was in Nigeria, it was a whole other game. So the reality was you had to think of internet connection. You had to probably build from scratch the payment gateway, the logistics, the procurement, because there was a whole lacking infrastructure. So if you wanted to scale with your core business, you had to build the infrastructure and the foundation. That's the same thing with the entrepreneurial ecosystem. We've got to take a step back and build the foundation so that we can foster great companies and great talent. And so at Seedstars World, after 4 years, and I remember very clearly the first world tour where we said, let's go and invest. But then we realized it couldn't be a spray and pray model. We had to really be part of supporting and building this ecosystem. We had to build a global platform to connect and foster exchange. And through Seedstars World, we're trying to connect all the different continents. We had to build spaces where the community could live offline all through the year, and these spaces would foster creativity and innovation. We had to build an academy because you couldn't accelerate companies if you can't accelerate talent. So then we had to put in place an education program so that we could train wannabe entrepreneurs. And finally, last year, we launched our first acceleration program to start and support and accelerate those 6% that we have already identified and attract funding to help them scale. But we're not the only one. And there are so many ecosystem enablers that are also supporting co-working spaces, accelerators, incubators, and our partners on the ground that we call them our ambassadors are the ones that are definitely the foundation and the pillar of the Seedstars group. And they're doing enormous work on the ground to build these ecosystems. And too many times I read and hear people talking about these ecosystems enablers that they're not bringing the best unicorns. But we've got to start somewhere. Don't forget that. They are the ones taking the risk to promote and to induce a culture of entrepreneurship that is so fundamental in order for us to get our unicorn stories around the world. But we also need the government to build the right environment. We need corporates to understand what is their place in the innovation cycle, that they have unbelievable access to know-how and distribution where entrepreneurs that are more nimble and disruptive can take advantage. We need investors. We need to educate on-the-ground investors that have so far been in more traditional sectors to understand what is happening in front of them. And we also need foundations in order to build the capacity activities that make an economy so great. You see, in many ways, entrepreneurs is David, and global challenges such as unemployment, education, or financial inclusion are really the Goliath of our time. And us as an ecosystem are here to make David win the battle. So when I am asked in these past days why it took us so quickly the opportunity to be here today, how we were able to scale so fast from 20 to 65 countries, and still too many people don't understand quite how this happened, well, it's simple. because I still only have 21,950 days left. And we put ourselves one crazy ambition, and we have to make sure that every day counts. Thank you very much, and enjoy the Seedstars Summit.